Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. As late as the 1970s, women's brains were considered to be inferior to that of men, and especially so in the game of chess. Chess is a game that demands a high level of spatial awareness, among other skills, and it was erroneously believed that women could never equal men at the Grandmaster level. In fact, not one woman had made it to the Grandmaster level until Susan Polgar came along. Susan's father, Laszlo Polgar, he didn't believe in inborn talent. He wrote a book about genius, and in that he emphasized the fact that geniuses are made, not born. To prove the point, he and his wife Clara educated their 3 daughters at home. And while geography and history lessons were important, chess was considered to be the most valuable lesson of all. At 4, Susan Polgar won her first chess championship in the Budapest Girls Under-11 Championships, and that with a score of 10-0. In 1982, at the age of 12, she won the World Under-16 Girls Championship. In a series shot by National Geographic called My Brilliant Brain, Susan Polgar talks about her first visit to the premier chess club in Budapest. When she visited, she was just a little girl.
Wow, I haven't been here in over 15 years, and this is the first place I ever came to a chess club. I first came here late 1973 or very early 1974. And, well, the place so far looks exactly like it did then. I walked in a room. It was full of smoke with elder men, them thinking that my father is looking for a game and just brought me along. But the reality was my father wanted me to have a game to see how I'll do against the members of the club. I had a whole bunch of guys after losing to me complaining. One said, "Oh, I didn't sleep well." The next one, "I was sick." The third one, "I had a stomach ache." It's like was kind of going on in a series. And, I jokingly said that I've never beaten a healthy man.
Susan Polgar continued her meteoric rise. She was the first woman in history to break the gender barrier. She qualified for the Men's World Championship in 1986, and then in 1991, January, Polgar becomes the first person to earn the Grandmaster title in the conventional way of achieving 3 Grandmaster norms and a rating of over 2,500 points. That was it. Men couldn't claim that women weren't equal to Grandmaster status. In time, Judith, her second sister, also became a Grandmaster, and the third sister, Sophia, she also earned a norm at the Grandmaster level. This was in 1989, and she was only 14. The mental myth was shattered once and for all. In business too, we have to deal with the mental myths, and these hold us back. We read articles online, we watch videos of presentations, and suddenly there's these myths that take hold of us and they create a factor of intimidation. It feels like everyone else is moving ahead and we are lagging behind. It feels like everyone else is taking the right steps and it's not just happening for us. But in business, as in life, it's not enough to just get and keep things going. We have to make sure that we don't get bogged down in myths. These myths that have no basis in reality. And we're going to look at 3 myths today, 3 persistent myths that drive us crazy. The first myth, the first mental myth that is copying is not good for you and that we need to be original. The second mental myth is that you need to remember what you learn. And the third myth is that you need to speed up your learning, and there are systems that can help you go faster. Let's find out why these myths are useless for most of the time and need to be removed, banished once and for all. Let's start out with the first myth, which is that copying is bad for you. You need to be original. When you look at the Taj Mahal, you don't think of Humayun, do you? Humayun who, you ask? For over 200 years, the Mughals ruled over parts of what is modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. In what is surely one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. They were rulers of between 110 to 150 million people. That's 1/4 of the world's population at that time. The family tree of the Mughal emperors started with Babur, went down to Humayun, Akbar the Great, Jahangir, but it's Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan gets most of the spotlight. And let's geek out a bit on history because we're talking about the Taj Mahal, built by Shah Jahan, Emperor Shah Jahan, who was utterly besotted with his wife Mumtaz Begum. In an age where marriages were simply ties between one ruling family and the next, Shah Jahan and Mumtaz fell in love with each other. But Shah Jahan was completely in love with Mumtaz. He showed very little interest in his other wives. He had a child with each of them, but with Mumtaz, he had 13 children, which, if you're rolling your eyes, was a family size that was quite common back in those times. Anyway, on 17 June 1631, at the age of 38, Mumtaz Begum died while giving birth to what would have been the 14th child. The Taj Mahal is a memorial to the intense grief that followed. It took 21 years from 1632 to 1653 to build the Taj Mahal. And today, if you're around Delhi, you're likely to make a trip to Agra to look at this remarkable monument. The Taj Mahal has had more than its share of inspiration from another structure built almost 100 years earlier, Humayun's tomb. If you look at Humayun's tomb and then look at the Taj Mahal, there's more than a striking resemblance. It almost looks like a copy. Copying has been given a bad name because it is often mashed with plagiarism. Long before the advent of computers, the best way for an artist to learn to draw was to copy. If you head to Amsterdam and you look at Van Gogh's start, you'll notice that he copies a lot. There's a museum there. It's dedicated solely to Van Gogh. And the curators have taken great pains to show how Van Gogh's early art was almost an identical copy of the Japanese art of the time. As it says on the museum's website, Japanese printmaking was one of Vincent's primary sources of inspiration, and he became an enthusiastic collector. The prints acted as a catalyst. They taught him a new way of looking at the world. But did his own work, change as a result? In the second half of the 19th century, there was tremendous admiration for all things Japanese. Vincent didn't pay much attention to this Japonisme at first. Very few artists in the Netherlands studied Japanese art. In Paris, by contrast, it was all the rage. So it was there that Vincent discovered the impact Oriental art was having on the West. And that's when he decided to modernize his own art. In a letter to his brother Theo, Vincent van Gogh says the following: "My studio is quite tolerable, mainly because I've pinned a set of Japanese prints on the walls. I find them very diverting. You know how these little female figures in gardens or on the shore, horsemen, flowers, gnarled torn branches. And he goes on and on and on. And so Van Gogh and his brother go out and they buy stacks of Japanese woodcuts because They recognized the power of Japanese art. They recognized that it was as good as any Western masterpiece. And then he goes about copying everything. Van Gogh copies the structure, the composition, and he says, that all of his art is based to some extent on Japanese art. Whether you're a writer, a singer, golfer, or a musician, you have to copy. At Psychotactics, we have the Da Vinci cartooning course, and we have whole weeks where the participants have to trace, yes, with regular butter paper or tracing paper, or if you're on the iPad, then you trace on the iPad, but you are tracing just like you did when you were a child. To be able to copy allows you to see what the other person has done and seen and experienced before. And then you, in turn, can do something similar. I wasn't always a cartoonist. I started out copying Superman and Batman and other superheroes. Then I moved to comic strips like Hugger the Horrible, and for a good while, even Dennis the Menace. Years later, I was copying Mort Drucker and Jack Davis from Mad Magazine, and Ajit Nainan, who was a caricaturist for India Today, which was one of India's largest magazines at the time. And the copying didn't stop there. When I started out in advertising, I started out as a copywriter. I knew almost nothing about copywriting, so I'd leaf through the books, the advertising books called One Show, and they were so thick that they could be used as doorstops. I learned a ton of how ads were being made from those books alone. When I moved to marketing, I brought endless material from Jay Abraham. And I learned how he promoted his courses, how he promoted his workshops, how his home study versions were delivered. I'd get his 15 or 20 page sales letters in the mail, which is the actual mail. The mailman would bring it. And then I'd go through them with a yellow marker. I'd try to figure out why I was so excited to buy his material. When you copy, you learn. When you copy from many sources, you start to merge one style into another until you soon have a style of your own. And if you keep copying, your fixed style changes. When I look at some of the cartoons I did between 2000 and 2010, I cringe a lot. I don't like the colors, I don't like the line work, and I want to change it all. Not entirely, of course. I don't want to erase the work. I'm not that daft. But the point is that if you keep shifting and keep learning and you keep adding a different style, everything changes. And this is different from plagiarism. Plagiarism is a ripoff. It's a photocopy of someone else's work. And more importantly, it's stuff that you call your own. You don't give any credit to the original person, to the creator. You say it's your own work. And sometimes you just put it there on your website as your own work. That's plagiarism. You know when you're being a plagiarist. You know when you're not just copying to learn, but you're just ripping off someone else's work. But copying is very important. Without copying, you very quickly plateau. Copying is what pushes you outside your comfort zone, and it pushes you outside the comfort zone a lot. When Van Gogh started to copy Japanese artists, he had to relearn a whole different way of painting, a whole different way of composition. That's because Japanese artists often left the middle ground of their compositions empty. They often excluded the horizon too, or abruptly cropped the elements of the picture at the edge. And he had to learn all that stuff. However, all copying shouldn't be done blindly. It's one thing to copy a style, but quite another thing to blindly copy what others are doing. For instance, when we started doing our early workshops in Auckland and Los Angeles, catering was included in the cost of the workshop. So if you came to our workshop, you got food, you got coffee, you got snacks, you got all that stuff. And so we were copying that blindly, and we realized that that was a mistake. That someone else's action do not necessarily work well for you. Sometimes you have to figure out what's the strategy behind why people do certain things. It's better to know the story behind the plan before making some horrible mistake and finding out later. Despite the downsides, copying is what makes the world go round. The Taj Mahal, Van Gogh's works of art. Even Disneyland got a large dose of inspiration from Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. So when you're thinking next of creating your website, painting, writing, or doing just about any activity, there is this mental blockage that, wait a second, I have to create something original. But no, you are going to copy. First, consider copying, consider tracing, consider the butter paper, consider doing something that involves copying. Because originality is slightly overrated. And that brings us to the end of the first section. In the second section, we're going to look at this whole memory thing. When we read a book, when we watch a video, when we do anything, even when we listen to a podcast, people often think, well, I want to remember it all. Why am I not able to remember it all? And that whole memory thing, that's a myth. And we'll find out why. In 2006, a journalist called Joshua Foer won the US Memory Championship. He also set a new US record in the speed card events. That's a deck of 52 cards, and in barely 1 minute and 40 seconds, he remembered them all. However, Joshua Foer doesn't consider himself to have a very good memory at all. He'd forget where he put his car keys, often where he's parked his car in the first place. He'd routinely leave food in the oven, forget his girlfriend's birthday and their anniversary. His whole journey towards this memory championship was just to find out what made memory champions so amazing, what caused them to be memory champions. And this was in 2005 when he started out on this journey. And by 2006, he was the US memory champion. If there's one statement all of us have heard before, it's this: I have a really bad memory. At first, it's some relative, maybe a grandparent or someone much older that seems to complain about memory. But increasingly, even in your teens and 20s, you'll find yourself and others making statements such as, I can't remember names at all. I have a really bad memory. Which seems to make sense because we find that there are those that have memories like elephants, and our memories seem like a sieve. Trying to remember what we have learned seems hard. It seems often impossible. We spend so much time learning. We spend so much time building up skills and knowledge, and then forgetting seems to land all of that hard-earned information into the gutter. Forgetting seems to be the arch enemy of learning. Forgetting seems to be our failure, and it drives us crazy. And yet, forgetting is exactly the opposite. The brain, it's nature's most sophisticated spam filter. That's what Benedict Carey, the author, writes in his book, How We Learn. To be able to remember one thing, we often have to forget the other. In his book, he talks about how we're all amazingly impressed at the sight of a spelling bee. And a spelling bee is a competition where young kids seem to be able to spell amazingly complex words. As all contests go, there's a winner and there are losers. Yet, how do we make every one of those seemingly smart kids lose? Instead of getting them to spell words, let's say we drag them back on the stage and then we run a different type of memory test. The questions would go like this. Name the last book you read. What did you have for lunch 2 days ago? Which was the last movie you saw? What's your sister's middle name? What's the capital of Ouagadougou? It's Burkina Faso, by the way. And Carey goes on to say that in a hypothetical contest, each one of these highly concentrated minds would be drawing a lot of blanks. Why is this the case? And how is this related to what you're learning? Most of us automatically assume that we should remember what we learn. In many cases, we assume that we have understood what we've just read, we've seen something, we've heard something, and in almost every instance, it might take 3 or 4 tries for a person to get all the facts right, even if they go back over the information. Take, for instance, this article itself. You probably remember there was a memory championship. But was it a world championship or was it based in a specific country? Who won that championship? Do you remember the year? You possibly remember that the winner was male, that he was a journalist, but there are constant gaps in your memory. which is why people tend to write notes. However, while notes might be a better than nothing option, they're still extremely poor at pulling up details. All information is dependent on your initial knowledge of the subject matter. Take, for instance, the book called Dartboard Pricing. The book goes a lot into why one product or one service can be priced higher than a similar product in an identical market. So as you're reading this book or you're listening to the audio, there's a feeling that you're getting the idea. However, the moment the client pulls up a pricing grid, they get elements of the grid completely wrong. Now, logically, this shouldn't be the case at all. You have the book in front of you, the information isn't flipping past you at high speed. Even so, clients will get the pricing grid wrong. To really get the information, you have to go back several times. The brain is designed to pick up some information and just drop all the rest. The best way to retain information is to follow the method that the brain prefers. And that is to get to the first powerful idea and then turn off everything. Turn off the audio, close the book, stop watching the video. If you have to rewind or go back, go back. But going forward does very little good. Your brain isn't necessarily picking up the details as you progress. Even when reading an article, I will get to a point where I will run into something profound, something different, something difficult. At that point, I stop. I stop any sort of progress. If it's on my phone, I freeze the idea by taking a screenshot. If it's on audio, I stop listening to the podcast. If I'm listening to something on Audible, I'll stop. I'll take a clip. I'll send it to myself on email. Yes, you can do that with the Audible app. And that's how I'm going to remember what I've just read. And that's what you can do as well. That breakdown allows your brain to stop at that point. And often, I'll just stop. I won't go ahead. I'll probably talk to Renuka. I won't go back to that audio until much later. And then it starts to make more sense. Then I will press that pause button and then go forward or even go back and then come back again to that point where I was. Does this method mean that you progress 1 inch at a time? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It depends on the information you're learning. I'll listen to some podcasts and it's pure storytelling. It's pure entertainment. It's information that keeps my brain cells entertained. The audio might apply to the business. It might not apply, but at least I don't have to remember all the details in my memory. However, if there's something that's important, if there's something I have to write a book about, if there's something I have to write a story about, an article about, a podcast about, now I have to stop. I have to come back later. And it's a way of highlighting that information. It's forcing your brain to remember. And I do this at workshops and at seminars as well. I will continue to sit and participate in a seminar, but I wait for the first big point to hit me. And that's when I'm done. I'm technically ready to go home. I notice that others are scribbling tons of notes, but I know I will remember nothing when I get back. So I keep the idea down to 1. Now, if I'm feeling really generous, I may add a second or a third point, but that's easily the upper limit. I don't have these pages and pages and pages of notes because I know I won't remember. I know I won't implement. You don't need to remember everything. This factor of needing to remember everything that you learn is a complete myth. Your memory or the memory of champions, it's remarkably similar. The brain is one of nature's most powerful spam filters. It remembers what's important, and hence, it's your job to help your brain. When you find something that's important, dig in your heels, stop. Then go back and review it later. And that's how you'll improve your memory. That's how you improve your knowledge over time. That brings us to the end of this podcast. Yes, I know, we've only covered 2 points and we had to cover 3 points, but we'll cover it in the second part. So what did we do so far? Let's do a little summary. And we do the summary to boost our memory. So here we go. The first point that we covered was that you didn't have to be original, that you should be copying. When we built the first website at Psychotactics, I looked at other websites. I literally did something like a tracing of those websites. And if you go back and you look at the website, you can't see that tracing, because what happens is you take many elements and eventually the Psychotactics website looked different from the other website. The same thing applied to the introduction of the brain audit. If you look at the introduction of the brain audit, I got the inspiration from Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. Now, you can take the brain audit introduction side by side with Steve's book and see if you can find any resemblance. But it was there. It was copying in the first instance. I learned this as a cartoonist. I learned this as an artist. You don't become great by inventing something brand new. You copy something, you improve on it. All the stuff, Google, your computers, everything that you look at today has been copied and improved, copied and improved, copied and improved. It's not plagiarism. It's not just this blatant, I'm going to take all the credit for it. But a lot of people think that you have to be completely original every single time. And that's where they have it wrong. And that's where they waste a lot of time. And that's where you're not able to get on the shoulders of giants, as it were. They've already done the work for you. You need to improve on their work. That's what copying does. It makes an original when you copy from different sources. And as long as you don't end up with a mishmash, your copying helps you move forward. So the thought that you have to be original, that's the first mental hurdle. But the second mental hurdle is probably a lot worse. And that is that you have to remember everything that you learn, or you have to remember a good deal of what you learn. And it's not the case at all. In fact, your brain works as a spam filter. That's the primary job. When you're paying attention to a conversation, say someone starts to say your name at the corner of the room, and you're speaking to someone right in front of you, you know what you do. You start focusing on that person, but you're not paying attention to the person in front. This is why people are focusing on their phones and they go into lamp poles and gutters and sometimes straight on the road and splat. That's because the brain tunes out everything. As you're looking at the computer, you are not completely aware of what else is going on in the room. And that's what memory is really about. You don't have to remember everything. But if you want to highlight stuff, you have to stop. So when you get to a really good point and you have to remember something, or you have to create an article, or you have to create something, then you have to stop and you have to save it and you have to send it to yourself. And you have the technology to do that, so do it. It's on Audible. It was never on Audible before. You could only write a little note on Audible. You could bookmark it and write a little note. Now you can actually send a clip to yourself, which is really cool. So I do that. I stop and send a clip to myself, and then I'll probably listen to something else or nothing else, and I'll let it gestate. I'll just let it sink in there, that idea, and then I'll come back and write an article about it. And when we teach Marsha, we do the same thing. We get her to watch a series on, say, the solar system, and Professor Brian Cox covers this amazing series on the wonders of the solar system. And what she'll do is she'll pause and she'll make notes and pause and make notes, and then she'll write an email to Renuka with what she has learned about, say, Venus or Uranus or whatever. So it's a small segment. And there's this stopping thing that goes back and forth and back and forth. It's this lurching back and forth, almost like when you're learning to drive a car. And that is what learning is all about. That's what memory is all about. We'll look at the third part in the next episode, and let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. By the time you're listening to this episode, the article writing course home study will have sold out. We have sold 35 copies, and that's it for 2017. The next time will be 2018. There are no live courses online on psychotactics until mid-2018, but there are going to be a couple of workshops on landing pages. Now, you know what landing pages do, right? You have a product, you have a service, you have to sell it to someone online. And of course, there are hundreds and thousands of landing page tutorials out there. But the point is that they don't always sit well with you. How do you write that landing page? And how do you do it so that you don't spend all day? Actually, it takes a week sometimes or 2 weeks for people to do it. And these are very good copywriters. These are not just people who are trying to write a landing page every now and then. What the workshop does is it shows you how you can do that in 2 or 3 days. In 2 or 3 days, it's a format that I've devised because I get very busy. All these podcasts, 5000 BC, writing books. I don't really have as much time as I used to have to write a landing page. And so often we would just throw things together. And that's not a good system. So I had to devise things for myself, just like I devised the brain audit. It was for myself. And this course, it's going to be in Belgium and it's going to be in Singapore. So that's in April, at the start of April and mid-April. That's where we're going to have these courses. No dates yet, but if you're considering traveling across Europe or to Europe from other parts of the world, Belgium, Tintin Land, that's where we're going to have the workshop, and Singapore. So we'll see you there. Now, if you can't make it there, you can make it to 5000 BC. 5000 BC is what I talk about every time. It's where I learn so much and where you can learn so much. The biggest factor of 5000 BC is not the information. There's loads of information. There are interviews. There are all the things that you find in lots of websites, but that is not the most amazing thing of 5000 BC. The most amazing thing is that it gets you forward. You ask a question about a specific thing, you get an answer, sometimes a bunch of articles to answer that question. But there's also the Taking Action Forum. So this is like a twin-engined aircraft headed towards a destination. And that Taking Action Forum enables you to move one little step at a time. I'm using the Taking Action Forum to build the website. I'm using it to write a book. I'm using it. Me, I know. And so can you. So we'll see you in 5000 BC. You'll love it there. It's a great place to be. And that's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? Well, the last week I got myself the iPad Pro. Now, just to give you context, this is probably the 4th iPad that I own. And I didn't expect much from the iPad Pro. And I'm not asking you to buy this and not selling anything to you, but let me tell you this. I have 3 Wacom tablets or Wacom tablets, however you want to call it, in this very room where I'm recording. And 3 computers. Don't ask why. It's just too much trouble to sell the older ones, so they're all there. All of them have their own tablet, which is what I've used to draw cartoons for all this time. And then I got the iPad Pro. Well, I don't really know why. Quite inexpensive. I don't know why, but I got it anyway, and it is absolutely stunning. I have never been so excited about any product, let alone an Apple product, for such a long time, because usually they're just little upgrades, but I can sit and I can draw while on the sofa. I can write notes. I know this sounds pretty boring when I'm saying it, but it was very exciting. If you're on Facebook, you can see some of the cartoons and videos that I've done. I'll probably post some in 5000 BC as well. If you are thinking like, how I was thinking, should I buy this? Is it worth it? I think you'll love it. You have to get the pencil though. The pencil makes a huge difference. Again, I've got many of these styluses that I've used on iPads before. They're pretty hopeless. Well, they're not as good. This pencil is amazing. So I've been using Procreate and I've been using the iPad Pro. And since Sunday, I think I've done about 8 cartoons, which is probably more than I've done all year. So there you go. That's my new obsession. The last time it was the i3, the car, the BMW i3, the electric car, and now it's the iPad Pro. So a bit of a problem with all these eyes. And yeah, I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.